and we have treated them with kid gloves. We have treated them as if they're not involved in terrorism at all. Is that because of groups like Carlyle that have significant investments with Saudi Arabian interests? Is that because George W. Bush's father is in fact part of the Carlyle Group and is close to the Bin Laden family? And that is why we asked George W. Bush to have his father remove himself from the Carlyle Group, because it presents a conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of a conflict of interest.
I believe the Carlyle people, at least when I was there, and I know in my own situation, we spent an awful lot of time thinking about that and worrying about that.
Thinking about what? Exactly?
About the appearances of things. About how something we do might be perceived. And whether we care or not about it. Yes. And honestly, we simply believe that we had something to offer to the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and to other people with whom we invested in, and that people quite legitimately had built up a portfolio of friends and acquaintances and business experience and knowledge of how to deal in high-pressure situations, the tendencies of people, what they might do. We think that's a good thing.
Your son is the sitting president of the United States, interacting with the same countries and ruling elites that you and your company are interacting with. It's pretty apparent that there's a conflict issue here. And the problem is, very few people in this country are talking about this. No one really wants to go there. There have been a few sporadic news stories about Carlyle, and there have been a few skunks at the garden party, like myself, talking about the former president. But generally speaking, the glare of publicity and the spotlight of public attention has not been put on former President Bush or his son about this problem.
If the American people knew all the connections between prominent Republicans and Democrats in our country, with Saudi Arabia, with all of these institutions that have been...
Personal relationships you're talking about.
Yeah, business and personal relationships with these institutions that have far more to do with funding and sustaining terrorism than Iraq does, George W. Bush would not be reelected in 2004.
This is George W. Bush, the President of the United States. At this moment, the regime of Saddam Hussein is being removed from power, and a long era of fear and cruelty is ending. American and coalition forces are now operating inside Baghdad, and we will not stop until Saddam's corrupt gang is gone.
I think among the key strategists for the war on Iraq in the Bush administration, there's definitely a notion of seeing this as part of their plan to transform relationships in the Persian Gulf. And so I think their feeling is that they can have a pliable regime in Baghdad that will play ball on oil politics and so forth, they'll be far better positioned to deal with Saudi Arabia.
If they can remake Iraq into their image, under U.S. control, it'll be much more pliable regime than the Saudis, and they'll have much more freedom of operation in the Middle East. They won't have to depend so much on Saudi Arabia, and they'll have this pliant, client state in Iraq.
In the new era that is coming to Iraq, your country will no longer be held captive to the will of a cruel dictator. You will be free to build a better life.
If the U.S. actually takes over Iraq and does this whole rebuilding, they're going to have to rebuild their telecommunications systems. If you're a clever investor and you want to think for the long term, surely they would be thinking telecom. That's one area. The other area, of course, would be defense. United Defense has very extensive investments in Turkey and extensive joint ventures in Turkey and Saudi Arabia. If the U.S. installs a pro-U.S. government, you know that the defense contracts in Iraq are going to go to American companies as well.
Big market, and it's a wealthy country.
And what kind of business opportunity for Carlyle could there be in Iraq?
Well, I think they're going to be investing in companies that provide infrastructure initially, road building, bridge building, telecommunications building companies, establishing all kinds of things, selling refrigerators, setting up a cell phone system, selling handsets to the average Iraqi is going to want to have the same cell phone they have in Kuwait. So the big market.
So it's going to be a big opportunity there.
I think it'll be a big opportunity.
Christine, I gather this has turned out to be one of the best weeks in years on Wall Street.
Absolutely. Stocks roaring higher here. The Dow up 8 days in a row. That hasn't happened in more than 3 years. And the best week in more than 20 years. And now the Dow and the S&P are positive for the year, erasing all of those big losses from earlier this year. Oil prices tumbling. Coalition forces securing those key oil facilities in southern Iraq.
Lori, first an update. We've just received word from the Pentagon. The U.S. and Great Britain say they want the U.S. involved in a post-war Iraq. They also want a restarting of the Oil for Food program, and they want to make sure the U.S. is involved in humanitarian relief and deliveries to the Iraqi people. That's the very latest. Live from Washington, I'm Brian Andrews, 7 News. Okay. Okay. Yeah.